And we are back. This is the third session of submission coaching. Today we're going to be talking about comps, log lines, pitch lines, the differences. By the time we're done, you guys are going to be so ready for any cocktail party when anyone walks up to you and says, "Hi, so what do you do? Oh, what's your book about?" You guys are going to be ready. As we walk through this session, you will be happy to know that there is far less homework this time than there's been the last 2 weeks. What we at the moment are going to spend time doing this week is really solidifying your comp titles, your log line, and your pitch line. Now, some of you may be asking, what's the difference? That is what we're going to cover this week, so you're in the right place. But the first question I want to ask you is when you are pitching your book to an agent, to an editor, even talking to a reviewer or a bookstore or somebody that you have met at a cocktail party. When somebody asks you about your book or when you're talking about your book, what are you trying to achieve? And when it comes to pitching, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to convince someone to read your book? Are you trying to convince someone to give your book a chance? Or, and yes, there is a right answer to this question, are you trying to help them determine if this book would appeal to them? I would argue that people who are trying to convince someone to read their book are far less successful than people who approach this process with the mindset that they're trying to help agents determine if this book would be a good fit for them, if it would appeal to them. It's the idea of being of service to book buyers, agents, editors, trying to find a good match. It is much more helpful, and truthfully, you have much better results and make better impressions on people than the authors who are out there just desperately trying to convince somebody to read their book. It's a very different mindset, and one that I hope we can achieve as we go forward. One of the best ways to get that right mindset and to get into a place where you can be of service, of help to the agents, the editors, the bookstores, the reviewers, and in any part of your career, wherever you are, it starts by analyzing your own work and asking yourself certain questions and looking at certain aspects of your own work. It's not easy, but it's incredibly helpful. So we're going to start by just acknowledging that you'll be pitching your project in person and on paper, lots of times in email. To do this, you need to work out exactly what you're offering that no one else is, also called a unique selling proposition. But when you are approaching someone, it's not just about whether or not your book is appealing. It's whether or not your book offers something that no other book does. One of the things that often happens, especially with debut authors, is they do not realize that their novel, maybe it's their first novel, maybe it's their second or their third, is quite derivative. Most books are derivative. Why? Because there's no such thing as an original idea anymore. There just isn't. They've all come out, I promise. And being derivative is not your fault. You can't help it, but it is your responsibility. And if I have, tried to impress upon you anything in these last few weeks, it's how important it is for you to be reading the books and really being a part of your genres and your book areas community. Whether you're nonfiction or fiction, you need to know what's going on because that is the best way to find out if your book is derivative. And if it is, as I said, not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Then you can go in and make revisions. You can give it a more unique selling proposition. You can make it less derivative. Other people go the opposite. They have books that are outstandingly experimental. They are off the charts. You're right, there's nothing else like this. It's a book about cat poetry that has puppy artwork that was drawn by paper straws that were, taken out of the nests of baby sea turtles. There's nothing else out there like. You're right. It's completely unique. But it's a new idea that may be so out of this world that it's not really going to appeal to a broad audience. And editors and agents, if you remember from our first week, they're all about marketability. They're all about market viability, making money. And so your book may be so experimental, so unique, that the right person may not exist for it, or will certainly not know how to sell it. It is a very, very tough sell if you're derivative, but it's even tougher if you're completely out of this world. So what you want is that sweet spot. You want stories or books that immediately make an agent or a publisher say, oh, I think that's a good fit for me. I would like to see more. The best sentence you can ever get in your inbox, or if you're talking in person, is the following: huh, tell me more. Questions about your book, extremely appealing. So let's dig into how you're going to get that nice middle ground where people don't say, I've seen this before, or I don't know how to sell this, but instead say, this has potential. Why don't you send me more? And you can determine this on your own simply by asking yourself and writing down the answers to a few questions. The first question you may already have the answer to. Forgive me if I'm sounding a little obvious, but you need to be able to answer what the big question is in the story. All best-selling books and all books that get nice deals have big central questions. Even if they're small, beautiful little parlor novels, even if the entire novel takes place in one room and only has two characters, there's always big questions that need to be answered. Will the bad guy get caught or get his comeuppance? There has to be an antagonist. There has to be a bad guy if this is fiction or memoir. You can't say, oh, well, the bad guy's kind. No, you need to be able to answer, will the bad guy show up? Who is it? And will they get their just desserts? Will good triumph over evil? Will the protagonist save the world or find love or be happy or get that job? What is it what is the big question in the story that by the time you get to the end of the story, you'll have an answer to? And what is at stake? One of the biggest mistakes I see in queries is that authors don't tell me what the stakes are in the story, because I need to know if the stakes are high enough to be interesting. So if you've written a nonfiction book, what is at stake? Is it your health? Have you written a book where people are going to literally die if they don't change their ways? Is that at stake? Because that's a pretty high stake. Are the stakes a little lower? Will they find lasting love if they buy your book? Because that's a huge stake that people want to know. And for novelists, in the story, and memoirists, because I lump the two together, in your story, are the stakes high enough? If the stakes of your memoir are simply that you moved to another town and got a successful job and learned how to be an amazing person, well, that's wonderful. That's terrific. But everybody has that story. Just about everyone I know at some point got a new job and learned how to be an amazing person. Especially if you're in your 50s or 60s, everybody's got their own stories. Everyone has their own idea of what success is. So your story had better have some pretty high stakes. Did your life story include saving a bunch of orphans? Was an entire country rescued? What was at stake in your story to make it so important to the reader? And for novelists, the same sort of deal. If you've got a spy who's slipping into a different country to steal the manifest of a particular ship, so that a particular shipment of sheep's wool doesn't get to England, that's pretty boring. That's not a lot at stake. However, if you're slipping into a different country to, save all of the world leaders from an assassination attempt that's going to happen when they all don sheep's wool sweaters that are, poisoned, well, that's different. What is at stake in your story? Do you know? Can you actually put it into words? And again, for nonfiction, if you don't know what's at stake, what problem does it solve? What are your readers struggling with, and how can you help them? And you have to be very specific, very specific. Once you have those answers, I would like you to take those answers, just set them aside on a piece of paper, and turn your attention next to the idea of comp titles. Now, you are well on your way to having some terrific comp titles because at this point you should have at least 12 books by 12 different authors that are similar in feel, tone, and readership to yours. And I did ask you last week to pull out the ones that you can that are a year or so old. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go back to that list of titles and let's see if we can get some solid comp titles out of your list of readership list titles. The first thing I'm going to ask you is to go back to that list and just select out the books that have a similar theme, voice, setting, and point of view to yours. If you've written your book in an omniscient narrator, third person voice, point of view, then a chummy, informal first person point of view or a diary entry uh, book in terms of voice or setting is probably not a great fit. You need to make sure that the setting, the voice, and by setting I don't mean the city, I mean the type, like is it a diary book? Is it, but in the point of view, is it in first person? Is it in third person? What sort of narrator do you have? Are the themes similar? Is it a love story or is your book about corporate espionage? Pick the books that have similar theme, voice, setting, and point of view. Then all of your books should have more than 5,000 reviews on Amazon, but I want you to go back and double check because I want to make sure you have successful books in your comp title list. They need to be 20 months old, tops, not 21, not 22. Why do I say 20 months? Because by the time you're querying and people are actually reading your query, it could be 3 months from now. And I do not want your book to be more than 2 years old. And so you're coming up with comp titles today, but there are agents that may not see it for 3 or 4 months. So I need your comps to be less than 20 months old. And I need you to go in every 6 months and I need you to make sure your comps are still only 20 months old. Yes, you want best-selling authors. You want them to be successful. You want successful authors. Absolutely. 5,000 reviews or more on Amazon. But you do not want authors that are too best-selling. You can't have iconic authors. We talked about this before. If your authors are Stephen King or Danielle Steele, if they've been in the business for 30 years, if they've got 20 novels out or more, then they're not a great apples to apples comparison to you. You need authors that are closer in your book age. How many books do they have out? They should have only a few out. They should be best-selling, but they should not be iconic. It's a fine line. Debut authors are wonderful. If you can find some debut authors out there, and again, look on Publishers Marketplace through Publishers Lunch, hop around on the bestseller list, find authors that have just debuted in the last year, if possible. And here's one of the hardest things that I have to tell people. You are allowed to use books, movies, and television, and books that were made into movies and television when you're doing your log line. I will absolutely allow that. We're going to get into that in great detail. But when it comes to comp titles, that's going to be in your pitch letter. Comp titles cannot be books that were made into a movie or a TV show. Unless your book has already been optioned for a movie or a TV show, it is not an apples to apples comparison. Your book, if you are an author who is looking for an agent or an editing and publishing deal, then you need to make sure that the comp titles you choose are in the same boat that you are in. Those of you who just saw those rules for comp titles who have not written a novel, if you've written a memoir or a nonfiction book and you're saying to yourself, I can't live up to those, you're absolutely right. The rules are slightly different for you guys. Let's go over them. The first rule is you do need a similar theme or voice or setting or point of view. However, the main thing if you're doing nonfiction or memoir, it's all about the theme. So pay attention to the theme. If you've written a memoir about growing up in Appalachia, then I need you to find another book about growing up in some aspect of a mountain community or in the South. If you've written a nonfiction book about, I don't know, raising cows, I need you to find other nonfiction books about raising livestock or raising barn animals. I need you to find a similar theme. It's more important than voice and setting. Theme is the key for you. I want you to look on Amazon just like I asked the novelist, but I want you to only be looking for books that have 1,000 reviews or more. You do not have to shoot for 5,000, I promise. If you've written a memoir or a nonfiction book, 1,000 reviews, that's the level you're looking for. And a little differently than the novelists, you can go back 36 months. I know novelists, those of you who have written fiction, you're saying that's not fair. Well, life isn't fair. But memoirists and nonfiction authors, you've got 3 years. You've got 36 months to go back for your comp titles. But other than that, the other rules stay the same. You do need to find best-selling authors, meaning 1,000 reviews or more on Amazon, but not too best-selling. They can't be iconic. Please do not compare yourself to Bill Bryson. Again, if your aunt has heard of him, then they probably are iconic. Debut authors, if possible, are best. And just like I told the novelists, if it was made into a movie or a TV show, I need you to keep looking. So now you've answered the big questions. You know what's at stake in your book. You know what the big questions are. You know what problems are being solved. And you have at least 3 comparable titles. I know this says 2 or 3, but that's because I'm being nice. But you have the comp titles. You've got the answers to the big questions. Now you're ready to start writing your log line and your pitch line. So let's get to it. When this class got started, a lot of you filled out the pre-class questionnaire, and I got a lot of emails from you guys asking me, I've got a log line, what's a pitch line? Or I have a pitch line, what's a log line? What's the difference? Yes, you do need both. There is a big difference between a log line and a pitch line, and we will go through it in more detail, but the short answer here is a log line is shorter than a pitch line. A log line is 1 sentence. And it is pretty much there to determine or to help people determine if they want to ask you more about your book. And if they do, then you give them the pitch line. The log line comes first. The pitch line comes second. Yes, you need both. Let's dig into much more carefully what the differences are between the two and how to write them. As I said, log lines are pretty short. They are 10 to 12 words tops, a sentence. A sentence, maybe 2 sentences, 2 very short sentences. No semicolons, no run-ons. Come on, guys. But 10 to 12 words tops. And the purpose of a log line is to answer the question, would I like the book? Remember we said earlier in this session, are you trying to get people to read your book, or are you trying to help them determine if they would like your book? Because I really want your answer to be the second one. Even though we all know it's the first one, act like it's the second one. It'll help a lot. So a log line is supposed to answer the question, would I like it? It is not intended to explain the plot. When someone asks the question, what is your book about? Then you can give them your pitch. But if they ask you about your book, or if they ask you what you write, you start by giving them the 10 to 12 word log line, which will answer the question, would they like it? It is not a big long explanation of the plot. Nobody really wants to sit through that yet. Wait till they ask. It needs to use iconic and very ubiquitous examples. This is the perfect time to use movies, television if necessary, go absolutely nuts. This is absolutely the time that you can talk about Stephen King or Star Trek. You don't even have to use books. Use movies. Use your favorite television shows. Use Eat, Pray, Love. This is fine because this is your log line. This is a very, very high-level book to let people know whether or not this is a book that's for them. And the easiest and fastest way to do that is to use books, televisions, and movies that you are sure they've heard of. Don't go too esoteric, guys. These examples need to be extremely ubiquitous. They need to be out there in the public zeitgeist. So I have a couple of logline examples. None of these are of real books. I literally wrote these this week. So here are some logline examples that will just give you an idea of what I'm talking about. It's like a sexier Outlander, focusing on the castles, the lords, and the ladies, instead of Jamie and whatever her name is. It's a book that gives specific help for adults who suspect they may have ADHD. That's Pretty simple right there. It's a spy thriller, but instead of infiltrating another country, a naval officer has to spy on the army. Pretty simple. Now, if someone gave me this logline, that book's not for me. I don't like thrillers. I don't read thrillers. However, that book would totally be perfect for my Uncle John, and so I might want to buy that anyway. So don't worry. Your logline has to be honest. Your book is what your book is, and you are trying to find who the best fit is for your book. One of my favorite examples, and I have used this before, is it Southern Belles in Space. Think Sweet Magnolias meets Star Wars. I love loglines that say such and such meets such and such. I was once at a conference and someone said their logline was, what if Everdeen from Hunger Games found herself in Jane Austen's England? And I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm absolutely in. If Katniss Everdeen, showed up in Jane Austen's England, I was completely transfixed. I loved that logline. So these are what I'm talking. These are some examples of loglines. And again, the whole purpose of a logline is to keep it short and to answer people. Their basic question is, would I like the book? And when they ask what the book's about, a pitch is also known as an elevator pitch. The reason why it's known as an elevator pitch is that iconically that phrase was coined by the idea that you could get through the entire pitch between one floor and another floor on an elevator ride. 15 seconds. 2 to 3 sentences. If someone got on your elevator on the floor 2 and asked what your book was about, you'd be able to get through your pitch before they got off on floor 3. People talk about elevator pitches as though they're going to be on the elevator for 10 floors. You don't know that. This person could get off at the next floor. 15 seconds, 2 to 3 sentences tops. And it is intended to explain the purpose or the plot. The whole point of a pitch is not to talk about your book and what it is. It's to focus on the reader's desires and needs. A pitch is intended to explain the purpose of the book so that the person who you're pitching to can decide if it satisfies their reader's desires or needs. And that is what makes a difference between a pitch line and a log line. So let's work together and go through an exercise right now. Feel free to pause this video when you need to help you get a pitch written. So I'm going to start by throwing you a little bit of a curve. I don't want you to talk about your book at all. I want you to take a moment and think about your favorite book, or one of your favorite books, a book that you like. I don't care. And I want you to pause this video, and I want you to jot down in a couple of sentences, two sentences, maybe 3. I want you to describe your favorite book. If I said to you, what's your favorite book? And you said, it's The Green Unicorn. And I said, interesting. What's it about? What would you tell me? What would you say? Well, you'd say, well, it's actually not about a unicorn. It's actually about a young boy who lives and works in a mine. And you'd give me 2 or 3 sentences telling me what the book was about. So if you were going to sit down with your best friend and describe to them your favorite book, how would you do it? I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to write down a couple of sentences describing your favorite book. It may take you longer than you think. It's not easy, even if you love the book. Do you have your description of your favorite book? All right, because we're going to use that as a template for you describing your book to people. That I want you to set that aside. It was a great exercise. We're going to come back to it. But that is your template for how you're going to describe your book in a pitch. So next up, what we're going to focus on is a couple other questions you're going to ask yourself, because once you have the answers, your pitch is going to just flow out of your pen. It's going to be so easy. I know we've asked versions of this before, but I'm going to ask you right now to, on that same piece of paper where you're jotting all these notes down, to ask yourself, what does your book do? Is your book's purpose to entertain? Or is it to educate? Or is it to inspire? Is it 2 of those? Is it 1 of those? Your book should probably fall in 1 of those 3 categories, maybe 2, but usually 1 of the 3. Is it a memoir and the purpose was to inspire? Is it a novel meant to entertain? Is it a nonfiction book meant to educate? What is the purpose of your book? What does it do? I'd like you to take a minute and pick one. Yes, the answer may be two, but choose the one that makes the most sense. The next question I would love for you to answer is to jot down for me in one sentence how your book is different from others. What makes your book different? This is what makes your book unique. And if the answer is nothing, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. But I really want you to think about it. I want you to take some time and see if you can come up with a way that your book is different from others. If you've come up with it, great. And if not, then you're still in great shape. Because another question you can ask is, how is your book better? How is your book different from other books, and how is it better? Is it newer? Does it have more up-to-date research? Does the novel have different characters that have not been explored in literature before? Does it focus on a time in history that tons of people are interested in, but it focuses on a country in history that has a complete unique perspective on that time in history? What makes your book different, and what makes it better? I'd like you to write those things down. You have to come up with at least one or two answers. It's incredibly important because those answers are your unique selling point. USP, you may have heard those initials before. A USP is the key to you getting an agent. It's the key to you getting a publishing deal. Deciding if you are getting into that sweet spot between derivative and outlandish, that unique book that is familiar enough and that has that wonderful spot between derivative and outlandish. That is your unique selling point. And at this point, I'm hoping you actually have it written down on paper. Now, you're ready to put it all together. This is wonderful. You have your description of your favorite book. You've actually already written a pitch because that's pretty much what it is. You know how your book is unique. You've got the great attitude that you're just trying to help people determine whether or not your book is a good fit for them. You know what your comp titles are. You know what your readers have been reading. The last couple of weeks you've been doing some really hard work, and the stuff that I've seen coming out of you guys is amazing. I am just loving the work. I mean, you guys are really putting in a lot of sweat and tears here, and I'm very, very impressed. So now we're ready to write your pitch. Let me show you a couple of examples of a pitch. I just wrote these today. These are just off the top of my head. Are they perfect? No. They're not meant to be perfect. You're going to write several pitches and then you're going to refine them. But here are 3 imperfect starts, pitch examples that I wrote. My novel was written for fans of Outlander who want something just as hot, but are far more interested in the clan leaders, the lords and the ladies, and how they actually lived than, the guys that were running around in the fields. So that's one pitch. Another pitch I wrote, it's a book for people who are frustrated with books like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and other self-help books that were written before we truly understood neurodivergency. This book was written using sentence and paragraph structure that was scientifically designed and proven to be easier for people with AD and ADHD to read. There's a lot of unique selling propositions right there. So the first pitch talks about why your book is different. The second pitch talks about why your book is better. Third pitch, it's a naval military thriller, but the main character has to infiltrate a rival band of the armed forces. The differences between the Army and the Navy really trip him up while he tries to find out if the attacks on civilians is the work of one rogue officer or part of a larger plan by an entire military branch. Now you may say to yourself, if you have written the Outlander book, how come the naval military thriller gets all those words? Well, you can do that. Remember I said these are not perfect. These are 3 examples of pitches that I put down, and now I would very, very much like to see yours. We're going to work together over the next week before our next class session, and I would love to read your pitches, your log lines, and your comp titles so that I can help you and we can get them polished up beautifully. Once you have your comp titles, your log lines, and your pitch lines ready to go, you will have everything you need to mix and match and write all of the possible combinations you need for any pitch letter that you may need to write in the future. Comp titles, log lines, pitch lines. If you can write 3 of them, then no matter who you're pitching and what their needs are, you will probably have, I will even go so far as to say, I bet that you will have all that you need ready to go in your files, that whatever pitch letter, query letter, or query opportunities that you need to address, you will have all of them ready to go in your toolkit. I would like you for homework today to write for me 3 very strong log lines, 3 different pitch lines or pitch sessions, and I would like 3 comp titles. Send those to me. You do that. I will look up the sales for you of your comp titles. I will evaluate your log lines and your pitch lines, help you polish them up, and then next week you'll be ready to put everything together for your query letter.